Today, we are talking about the Limerick nuclear power plant. I'm Chad Loftus. I'm here with Tyler Heglis, Sital Liu, Ryan Stowe, and Brian Swift. In this presentation, we are going to be going over the energy system, heat transfer process, mass transfer process, and sustainability framework that can all be found in the Limerick nuclear power plant.
First, we're going to start with the location. The Limerick nuclear power plant is located in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. This is located in the southeast region of Pennsylvania. It is about an hour to the northeast of Philadelphia. Pottstown has a population of 22,670 based upon 2009 census report. This power plant sits on a 400-acre plot of land that is on the outskirts of Pottstown. The power plant sits right beside the Schuylkill River. This is due to the fact that the power plant needs a constant flow of cool water to help cool down the system. Next slide, please. The Limerick nuclear power plant is owned by the Exelon Corporation. The Exelon Corporation is an energy company with locations that are scattered across the United States. However, we are just going to focus on the only one that they have in Pennsylvania, which is the Lime Rock nuclear power plant. This power plant has two nuclear reactors that produce its electricity. The first of the two reactors came online on February 1st, 1986, while the second reactor came online January 8th, 1990. These two reactors cost around $7.246 billion to build, based upon 2007 USD values. The plant has two cooling towers that can be seen in Figure 2. These two cooling towers help to cool the water that is in the reactor. This plant has around 1,514 to 2,725 liters of water per megawatt hour being pumped into it from the Schuylkill River. Next slide, please. The Limerick nuclear power plant is a boiling water power plant. This means that the reactor heats up water until it starts to boil. The water begins to boil, creating steam. The steam then turns a turbine which generates electricity. The steam, after it passes through the turbine, goes to a condenser to be cooled down by water from the nearby water supply. The nearby water supply is the Schuylkill River. The water used for the cooling and the water that is heated by the reactors never mix. Once the water is cooled, it is pumped back into the reactor to be heated up again and go through the cycle again. This plant is one of the main producers of electricity for the Pottstown region. This plant produces 2,317 megawatts of electricity. This is enough electricity to power 2 million homes. This way of power generation also has zero emissions and produces carbon-free electricity. This plant also has an impressive 90.85 capacity factor in its lifetime. The capacity factor is how much electricity the plant is actually producing compared to the maximum possible electrical energy output. Nuclear energy has the highest capacity output amongst all the renewable energies. Next slide, please.
So, I'm going to introduce the mass transfer problem for our project. First, as everyone can see in the figure, there are two huge chimneys with a large amount of white fog being emitted. This is the cooling system of LGS with a twin natural drift cooling tower. So basically, the principle of cooling in this case is that the station transports water from Schuylkill River as a source to take away the waste heat produced during the nuclear reaction. In order to increase the efficiency of cooling process, the water with heat will be sprayed from nozzles to increase the surface area. During this process, some of the water will evaporate and emit into atmosphere. On the other hand, water vapor is considered as one of the greenhouse gases that may cause environmental issues. So we decide to model the water vapor emissions in LGS that is specifically due to the diffusion by estimating the molar flux. Next page, please. So in order to estimate the molar flux, we first need to know the diffusion coefficient. But before that, we made several assumptions to simplify the problems. First, we assume room temperature and pressure to adjust the condition of evaporation. Then, we assumed a binary system with only water vapor and air, so that we estimated the Lennard-Jones diameters by averaging the diameters of oxygen and nitrogen. Also, we simplified the shape of the cooling towers from hyperbolic shape into a column, so we can further estimate the volume. And we assume that all heat loss is due to evaporation, so we can estimate the amount of water being evaporated by applying enthalpy of vaporization. Finally, we assume 100% conversion of water into vapor at the top of the tower, so that by the last two assumptions, we can estimate the change in concentration and change in distance. Thus, the concentration gradient can be calculated. Next page, please. So this is our process of calculating the diffusion coefficient. Basically, we use the equation of diffusion coefficient of a binary system discussed in class. However, the value we obtain is not in agreement with the range of diffusion coefficient of gas in the lecture slides, so we did some research and found out that the diffusion coefficient for water vapor to air is 2.42 times 10 to the negative 5 square meter per second, which is acceptable. Finally, with the estimated concentration gradient discussed above, we got our final answer for the molar flux by utilizing the Fick's law.
Heat transfer plays a crucial role in electricity generation. Nuclear power plants, such as the Limerick power plant, utilize convective heat transfer in order to generate electricity. In order for the convection cycle to begin, a heat source is needed to generate electricity, or to generate energy rather. In nuclear power plants, this heat source is in the form of a reactor where uranium atoms undergo nuclear fission, which releases a huge amount of heat and energy. The Limerick generating station uses a General Electric Type 4 boiling water reactor, which is housed in a GE Mark II wet containment unit. Next slide, please. Figure 7 represents the schematic of the GE fuel rod assembly in that reactor, which is the energy source for the heat transfer problem. These specific fuel rods consist of high-density uranium dioxide fuel pellets stacked within zircoli 2 cladding tubes. During the fabrication process, the fuel rods are evacuated and backfilled with helium. They are then sealed with zircoli 2 end plugs welded at each end. In the GE Type 4 reactor, the helium backfill pressure is set to 1 atmosphere. Next slide, please. In a boiling water reactor, water is heated directly inside the reactor vessel as a result of the nuclear fission occurring inside the fuel rod. As a result of this convection in a confined space, high pressure and high temperature steam is generated and stored, which is used to spin a turbine and create electricity. The Limerick generating station uses a forced circulation direct cycle system where water is boiled inside the reactor, which produces steam as passed through internal steam separators and dryers. Throughout this boiling process, the heat flux is dependent on the specific temperature difference between the cladding and the coolant, as well as the heat transfer coefficient. The cladding refers to the thin-walled metal tube that is the outer layer of the fuel rod, and the coolant is what is used to reduce the temperature. The first region of Figure 8, which represents the heat flux, is graphed with temperature difference, represents single-phase convective heat transfer, and the heat flux increases as the heat transfer coefficient increases. Second region represents subcooled nucleate boiling, and the convective heat transfer is a combination of both single-phase convection and nucleate boiling modes of heat transfer. Region C, which is the most important region, is described by fully developed bulk nucleate boiling and is the ideal region for this reactor to operate. This mode of heat transfer is very efficient due to the high turbulence created by the boiling process. Heat flux will increase as the temperature difference between the cladding and coolant increases, but once the transition from nucleate to film boiling occurs, as seen in the figure, the reactor becomes unstable and is in an unfavorable state. This occurs when the temperature difference becomes too large and should be avoided during operation. Next slide.
Next, we're going to be studying the effects of the sustainability of the Limerick nuclear power plant through its economics, its environment, and also its effects on society. Plus, we'll have a little bit on precautions that they have in case a worst case scenario occurs. For the first one, we have the economics, where the 2 reactors for the Limerick power plant takes place in the 9 total reactors for the Keystone State, where these 9 reactors create about 16,000 direct to indirect jobs, which can contribute to $2 million for the gross income for the state for different products that it produces, and can also contribute $69 million in taxes that goes towards the communities in the PA area. Next, the 2 reactors can produce, as said before, 2,317 megawatts of energy, which powers the 2 million homes in the area, where from this, $5.3 million are made through taxes that go towards Pottstown schools, roads, and also public services. Can you go to the next slide, please? Next, in a press interview with their parent company, Exelon, the Limerick power plant has put in place many different precautions to protect the environment around its power plant. Some of these include a groundwater collection system, a spent fuel leakage detection system, routine surveillance, engineers performing walkdowns of the system, chemists performing samplings and analyzing the area, and then lastly, a groundwater monitoring well. With these different stations, they can perform different tasks such as checking the integrity of the power plant, checking how the water supply is dealing with the chemicals or dealing with the coolant that comes from the Schuylkill River. And they also have different stations where after using these coolant waters, they're able to go and test the waters to make sure that there isn't anything harmful going back to the environment. Next, they also employ many different engineers to do walkarounds between shifts for checking how the plant is did, and also just checks up on the inner workings. Next slide, please. We also have a table that they provided where you're able to see different elements that have been found inside the coolant water that was used after testing the waters, some of which include titanium, strontium, magnesium, cobalt, zinc, silius, barium, and lithium. Next slide, please. Next, we deal with the sustainability for the society. As said before, this power plant creates many different jobs, from thousands of jobs for the Pottstown area, and helps contribute energy to 2 million homes. It employs about 2,750 additional jobs with carpenters that go in, and regional carpenters that work about 60,000 hours taking care of the plant. And then also during routine shutdowns, they employ 2,500 more specialized workers that perform maintenance and refueling of the power station. If this power plant was to be shut down, it would increase the unemployment rate in the Pottstown area from 3.7 to 4.03%. Next slide, please. Lastly, the Limerick Power Plant has also put in precautions in case of a worst case scenario, a meltdown or something bad happens. They've put in place evacuation points where people will go to, where they can meet up with their family and be a safe distance away from the power plant. They've also relayed information through different radio stations and also local TV stations in Montgomery County area to relay information on the emergency. And lastly, the Limerick Nuclear Power Plant conducts different routine tests to confirm that the warning signs are still working. Two of which is a semi-annual test on the first Monday of June and December, where they start at 2 p.m. For 2 minutes. They will sound a siren just to make sure that the power plant is correctly warning people in case of a worst case scenario. They also have another monthly test, except for those 2 months. Once again, the first Monday of every month, where at 2 p.m. they will have a short 1-second growl from the testing center. With these, we can see how the Limerick Power Station or power plant is protecting the community. They're making many different precautions to make sure they don't pollute the water, and they are a very pivotal part of the Pennsylvania and also Pottstown area. Next slide, please.
So to conclude, the Limerick Power Plant is a very interesting energy plant, from its unique history to the equations that show how it runs, to even how it interacts with its surroundings. We've went over many different things, from the structure of the power plant with its 2 reactors. We've also learned how it uses the Schuylkill River for its reactors as a coolant, and also when the power plant first started back in the late 80s and into the 90s. We also have overviewed the mechanics of the plant as seen in Figure 3. Plus, we've learned how the reactors use mass transfer using the inflow of water from the Schuylkill River into the cooling tower to convert it into vapor. From there, we explore how the reactors use heat transfer with its BWR/4 reactor as seen in Figure 6, how it uses that heat from the water vapor to create a high pressure, and how they eventually use fission inside the fuel rods inside the cooling towers to create energy. Many of these inner workings help show the uniqueness of this nuclear plant and also the fun of creating power. Lastly, we see how the effects of the Limerick Power Plant has on its surroundings around the Pottstown area, from the reactors creating well-paying jobs for those in the community, to it also taking precautions from having radioactive material escaping from the power plant and infecting the waters, taking many precautions to keep society safe. We also see how the power plants affect the people around the society, from jobs to also taking care of the township. And lastly, we also see how the power plant takes precautions in order to keep the people safe from a very bad emergency. In all, we now conclude our overview of the Limerick Power Plant, from its effects on society to even how it works. So, I hope you guys had a fun time learning about the power plant, and does anyone have any questions?
This is a list of references used for this presentation today. Thank you for listening.